I stood on the side of a deserted country road, clutching a small suitcase someone else had packed for me. No phone, no home, no family waiting for me. My own son had just driven off, leaving me behind like yesterday's trash, after my husband's funeral. But as the dust settled and the sound of their car faded away, I did something unexpected. I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and smiled. They thought I had nothing left. They forgot. When you strip everything away from a woman, sometimes what remains is the strongest part of her. This is my story. My name is Loraine Carter. I am 67 years old, and until a few months ago I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet heart of our family's apple orchard in Hazel Ridge. For 45 years, my world revolved around the rhythms of the land, the warmth of a home built from scratch, and the steady companionship of my husband, Gregory Carter. Together, we lived a life not of luxury, but of meaning. There were no grand vacations or shiny cars in our driveway. Only early mornings that smelled of rising bread dough, afternoons spent tending to apple trees, and quiet evenings with aching backs and full hearts. I never considered myself remarkable. I wasn't the kind of woman who chased after recognition. I found comfort in the simple things: kneading dough for the local farmer's market, feeding our flock of hens before sunrise, and watching Gregory harvest crates of apples with that calm, methodical way he always had. He used to joke that I was the glue that kept our home from falling apart, but I always thought it was the orchard that kept us together. Every inch of that land bore our fingerprints. From the old barn we painted ourselves one long summer to the orchard rows we planted tree by tree in our early 30s, when we still believed we could do anything. We raised a son, Logan Carter, under those wide skies and amongst the hum of cicadas. Logan was our pride, our only child. Gregory had hoped Logan would take to the land, but as Logan grew, his ambitions stretched beyond the fences that enclosed our world. He was smart, quick, with a hunger for the city that neither of us could tame. After graduating college, Logan built a life in the city, married a woman named Chloe who shared his appetite for success, and slowly the visits back home became fewer and further between. First he came home twice a year, then only for Christmas, and then sometimes not even that. I tried not to take it personally. Children grow, I told myself. They chase their dreams just like Gregory and I chased ours when we bought the orchard. But some mornings I would stand at the kitchen window, apron still dusted with flour, and wonder if Logan even remembered the sound of the rooster crowing or the smell of fresh apple pies cooling on the windowsill. Gregory stayed optimistic longer than I did. He used to say, "The land will call him back, Loraine. One day he'll hear it." But deep down, I knew that world had lost its voice to him. The orchard was no longer his future. It had become our past. Then everything changed with a phone call from the doctor. I still remember the way Gregory's hand trembled slightly when he hung up the phone, how he sat quietly in his chair for almost an hour before telling me, "Pancreatic cancer." It was like the world shifted under my feet, and yet outside the wind still rustled through the orchard trees, oblivious. Gregory didn't want Logan to know. He looked at me one evening after dinner, his eyes tired but steady, and said, "Let him be Loraine. Let him live without this burden a little longer." And because I loved him, I respected that wish. I sat through 14 months of slow deterioration, of watching the strongest man I'd ever known shrink before my eyes, turning frail, where he had once been sturdy, his laugh softer, his hands weaker. I became his nurse, his cook, his only companion. I never left his side, not during the early rounds of treatment when we still had hope, not in the quiet nights when he was too weak to rise from bed. I buried my grief in daily routines, in caring for him as fiercely as I had cared for our land. Those 14 months were the hardest of my life, and yet they also reminded me what love was meant to be: selfless, steadfast, without conditions. We didn't have much to say during those days. Sometimes Gregory would squeeze my hand gently and whisper, "I'm grateful." Loraine and I would swallow the lump in my throat and kiss his forehead. I thought that when the time came, Logan would come home and perhaps in mourning his father he would remember the roots that held him. But when Gregory passed and the funeral arrangements were made, Logan arrived dressed in a crisp black suit, Chloe by his side, polished as always. There were no tears on his cheeks, just polite condolences, the kind you give to acquaintances, not parents. Chloe had her tablet out within hours, coordinating schedules, managing phone calls. I stood by Gregory's casket, receiving hugs from neighbors, and felt the first real chill seep into my bones, not from the autumn wind that day, but from the realization that my son had already emotionally left us long ago. The funeral was simple, just as Gregory would have wanted. No extravagance, just family, neighbors, and old friends gathered by the orchard hill. As I watched the earth cover the man I'd loved for nearly 5 decades, I thought the coldest moment would be that final goodbye. I was wrong. It was the next morning, sitting alone in our quiet kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Gregory once read his newspaper, that Logan and Chloe came downstairs. Not in mourning, but dressed for business. They sat across from me, Chloe with her tablet in hand, Logan with his serious corporate demeanor, and I realized with a sinking heart they were here for more than just farewell. That was the moment my heart turned colder than the November wind rattling the shutters. I didn't know then that betrayal was waiting just around the corner. All I knew was that my world had changed. Gregory was gone. My son had become a stranger. And the home I had built, the life I had sacrificed for, was about to be weighed, measured, and possibly sold. But I didn't cry. Not that day. Not yet. Because a part of me, a part I had forgotten, was stirring quietly deep within, a part that had been silent for too long, and she was just starting to wake up. The morning after the funeral, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the steam rising from my cup of plain black coffee. The kitchen felt colder than usual, emptier. Gregory's chair stood silently across from me, the cushion still slightly indented from where he used to sit and read the newspaper. The walls felt like they were listening, absorbing my grief in silence. I thought the worst was over. I thought burying the man I loved would be the deepest pain I'd have to endure. But that morning I learned that grief can take many forms. I heard footsteps on the old staircase. 2 pairs, firm, purposeful strides from my son Logan, and the softer, quicker steps of Chloe, his wife. I braced myself, hoping for something simple, perhaps a shared memory of Gregory, a quiet breakfast together a moment to just feel like a family again. But when they walked into the kitchen, it didn't feel like family. It felt like strangers entering a boardroom. Logan was in a tailored blazer, perfectly pressed with his hair slicked back, in a style that always seemed more fitting for skyscrapers than farmland. Chloe wore a silky blouse, her makeup impeccable, every hair in place. She smiled politely, but there was something rehearsed about it. Like a sales rep walking into a client meeting. They took their seats at the table, but the warmth was missing, replaced by a strange tension that prickled at my skin. Logan cleared his throat, fingers lightly tapping on his ceramic coffee mug, the expensive kind Chloe always brought with them, imported from some European boutique. The small details didn't escape me. Even the way they sipped coffee here seemed like an intrusion on the simplicity of our life. Mom Logan began, his tone polite but firm. Chloe and I have been talking. I felt my shoulders stiffen slightly, my grip tightening around the warm ceramic of my mug. I waited. We know how much this place meant to you and Dad. He continued, his corporate voice kicking in smooth and practiced, but we think it's time to consider what's practical moving forward. Chloe chimed in, her voice soft, dripping with rehearsed sympathy. You've worked so hard, Loraine. You deserve to relax now. No more worrying about the orchard, no more dealing with maintenance or taxes or the hassle of it all. My mouth felt dry. The orchard isn't a hassle, I said quietly. Logan nodded like he expected that. We know, but it's a lot to handle alone, Mom. You shouldn't have to deal with all this at your age. At my age. The words hit like a slap, gentle in tone but brutal in meaning. I glanced at Chloe, who gave me a small patronizing smile as if I were a child being comforted. Logan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. My heart began to thud, slow but heavy. I had seen that kind of folder before, during bank meetings during the time Gregory and I applied for a loan to expand the orchard decades ago. The moment paper hit the table, I knew this wasn't just a conversation. This was a transaction. "We've already made some calls," Logan said, sliding the folder across the table toward me. "There's serious interest from a developer. They're willing to pay nearly $6 million for the property. It's a tremendous opportunity, Mom. You'll be set for life. You can finally enjoy your retirement without stress, without being tied down to the land." Chloe placed a gentle hand on Logan's arm and added sweetly, "There's a lovely community called Silverwood Retreat, just 2 hours south. They have activities, wellness programs, even art classes. You'd have friends your age, a beautiful apartment on-site care when you need it." I didn't touch the folder. My stomach churned as I looked at them. 2 polished adults sitting across from me, speaking about my life, my home, my memories like line items on a ledger. Logan took a breath and added, "Dad wanted this, Mom. We talked before. When he got sick, he knew how much work this place is. He didn't want you burdened." I felt the breath catch in my chest. "Gregory didn't tell me anything about this," I replied, keeping my voice even. Logan pushed the folder slightly closer. He signed papers. We had it done through my legal team in the city. It was easier that way, streamlined. Dad wanted me to handle the details to make things easier for you. Everything's prepared. With hesitant fingers, I opened the folder. The legalese blurred together, but my eyes zeroed in on what mattered most. At the back was a page with Gregory's signature. Or at least something that was supposed to be his signature. It was clean, steady, sharp. My throat tightened. The last 6 months of Gregory's life, he couldn't even write his name without trembling. His signature had become shaky, his hand frail. I had been the one guiding his hand for prescriptions, the one who signed hospice forms when he could no longer do it himself. The signature in front of me, it wasn't his, not as I knew him. "This isn't from Mr. Donaldson, our family lawyer," I said quietly, thumbing through the document to check the letterhead. It had Logan's corporate firm's name embossed at the top. My heart pounded heavier, but my hand stayed calm. Logan's face stayed neutral. Dad said it would be quicker this way. Clean paperwork, efficient. We didn't want to overwhelm you after everything. I set the folder back on the table. My tea had gone cold. The room suddenly felt suffocating. I stood pushing my chair back slowly, letting the scrape of wood against tile be the only sound for a moment. "I'll think about it," I said simply. Logan frowned as if I was deviating from some script they had rehearsed. Chloe smiled, rising quickly. "Of course. Take your time. We just want what's best for you, Loraine." I didn't reply. My back was straight, my head held high, but inside my heart felt like it had shattered into 100 tiny pieces. As I cleared the breakfast plates, my hands trembled, not from age, but from betrayal. They had come into my house not to console me, not to mourn their father, but to seal a deal. To convert our history, our sweat and sacrifice, into a transaction. I realized something chilling in that moment. My son didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a logistical problem to be managed, an obstacle to be cleared. That realization hurt more than Gregory's funeral. As I stood there, hands sunk into sudsy water, I whispered to myself, I thought I'd lost my husband. But maybe I lost my son a long time ago. And something in me, something I hadn't felt in years, began to stir. A quiet defiance, a long-buried strength I hadn't called on in decades. It started small like a flicker, but I felt it. They thought I was too old, too weak, too broken to fight. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The following morning, I rose earlier than usual, as if instinct had nudged me from sleep. The house was still empty in all the wrong ways. I padded softly into the kitchen, letting my fingertips brush across the countertops Gregory and I had chosen together decades ago. Every corner of this home carried the echoes of our life together, and yet it was now occupied by strangers who carried my blood, but none of my heart. I made myself a cup of plain tea and waited. As the minutes passed, the familiar sound of polished shoes on wood floors broke the morning silence. Logan appeared first, his jaw already tight, his eyes holding that same determined glint I'd once found endearing when he was a boy, learning to build a treehouse. Chloe followed shortly, impeccable as ever, her hands clasping a notebook and tablet, looking more like an executive than a daughter-in-law. "Morning, Mom," Logan said, sitting down across from me. "We were thinking we could finalize things today." The realtor is eager to move forward, and the developer wants to move quickly. There's no reason to delay, especially with the paperwork already done. I took a sip of my tea, willing my hands to remain steady. "I'm not making any decisions today, Logan," I said quietly. "I need time." Chloe's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, Loraine. But you know these deals can be time-sensitive. Waiting too long could cause the buyer to pull back." Logan leaned in slightly, his tone turning firmer. "Mom, I really don't want you to get overwhelmed. We've already set up a visit to Silverwood Retreat for this weekend. They have a beautiful facility, you'll love it. Everything is included. Meals, entertainment, wellness programs. You can live stress-free, finally." There it was again. That same script polished and rehearsed. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. I said I need time. I repeated, not raising my voice, but letting my words land with weight. Logan pressed his lips into a thin line. I saw the shift in his expression, the frustration beneath the surface, the way his jaw clenched when people didn't follow his timelines. I had seen it when he was younger, whenever we asked him to wait or told him no. But back then, Gregory would kneel by his side and explain patience. Now there was no one left to remind him of such things. Chloe's voice chimed in falsely light. "We thought it'd be good for you to at least see it. You know, no pressure to make decisions. Just a visit." I recognized the tactic. Make the person feel like they have a choice when, in reality, the plan was already in motion. I offered a tight smile, masking the storm brewing beneath my ribs. "Fine," I said. "I'll go visit. But nothing is decided." "Of course," Logan said quickly, relief flickering across his features. "We'll take care of everything." They moved through the kitchen like executives after closing a deal, talking about appointments and scheduling, already speaking of my life as if it were a finalized project. I listened silently, my chest aching, my hands gripping the warm mug just to feel grounded. When they finally left to make their calls, I remained seated, breathing slowly, holding my own silence. Then I stood, walked to the small desk tucked near the dining room window, the same spot where Gregory used to handle our bills, and where I tracked the orchard accounts. I opened the top drawer, reached for the key to the old safe we'd kept hidden behind the pantry shelves. Inside that safe, tucked beneath old tax folders and land surveys, Gregory and I had always kept our personal documents: marriage certificates, insurance policies, and the last revised version of Gregory's will. I remember him sliding it inside the envelope less than a year before his diagnosis. I remember his exact words, "in case life throws something unexpected our way." My hands trembled as I sifted through the papers. Receipts, letters, old insurance files. But the familiar cream-colored envelope was missing. I checked again, slower, pushing aside every piece of paper, until the bottom of the safe was bare. My heart pounded in my chest. My breath quickened. It was gone. The revised will, the one Gregory and I had gone through line by line together, had vanished. For a moment my legs nearly gave out and I had to brace myself against the countertop. I swallowed hard, closing my eyes, letting the weight of this betrayal settle into my bones. It wasn't just Logan's coldness, it wasn't just Chloe's rehearsed lines. This was deliberate, premeditated, calculated, Somewhere between Gregory's passing and the funeral, they had come into my home, gone through our private papers, and erased my existence from my own life. I stood there, letting the anger wash over me, sharp and biting. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't broken. I was awake. I reached back into the safe and pulled out a much older folder. It was dusty corners frayed, but inside was a title deed to a small parcel of land I had purchased when I was just 22 years old. Back when Gregory and I were newlyweds, I had invested my small inheritance in 18 acres of fertile land attached to a freshwater spring. At the time, we'd joked it was our just-in-case insurance, something separate from the orchard in my own name, untouched by any joint claims. Gregory had teased me for my caution, but he respected it. "It's smart," he'd said. "Always have something no one else knows about." Over the years, we rarely spoke of it. It sat quietly on the outskirts of our main orchard, unfarmed, wild, but protected. It was registered solely under my maiden name, Loraine Benson. My fingers traced the edges of the document. Suddenly, Logan's eagerness to push me into a retirement home made sense. Their need to close the deal quickly. Chloe's excessive charm. They thought they had it all. They believed they could push me aside like a loose thread, sew up the inheritance, and package our life's work to the highest bidder. But they forgot about this land. They forgot who I was before I became just mom. Before I became the person they assumed would nod quietly and disappear. I folded the deed carefully, placing it in a secure envelope, and tucked it into the inner pocket of my coat. My gaze drifted around the home Gregory and I built, the rooms filled with memories, the floors worn from years of love and labor. This house wasn't just a shelter. It was a chronicle of everything we had built together, and they intended to erase it in exchange for cash. A quiet determination settled over me. Not fury, not revenge, but something deeper. Clarity. I walked back into the kitchen, made myself another cup of tea, and stared out the window toward the orchard. The branches danced gently in the wind, oblivious to the human mess swirling beneath them. If I don't stand up now, I whispered to myself, I'll be erased from my own life. And in that moment, I knew I would not be erased. It happened the next morning, earlier than I expected. I had barely finished my tea when Logan walked into the kitchen, his expression already set. Chloe followed behind him, her features more restrained, almost reluctant, though I could see she wasn't about to interfere. Logan was carrying his keys, swinging them in that careless, confident rhythm I'd grown used to seeing whenever he wanted to rush something through without argument. "Come on, Mom," he said, his tone light but urgent. "It's a good day to drive down to Silverwood. They have tours today and the director is expecting us." I stared at him across the kitchen table. I hadn't agreed to this. I hadn't even had a moment to process all that had been dropped into my lap. But Logan was already moving, tapping impatiently on his phone, gathering his jacket, issuing orders like I was a client he needed to manage. Chloe stepped forward, her smile carefully painted on. "It's just a visit, Loraine. You don't have to make any decisions today. We just thought it would be nice for you to see it. Get a feel for the place, you know I said nothing." Deep down, I knew there was no kindness in this. This wasn't a casual visit. This was a relocation in motion. I could feel it in my bones, in the way Logan avoided my eyes, in the way Chloe spoke to me like I was a fragile relic being carefully repositioned. I turned to glance at the staircase, at the old walls that held decades of memories, at the photographs lining the hallways that told the story of a life built with love and hard work. But Logan was already ushering me forward, hand on my back, gentle but firm, the way you guide someone who has no say in the matter. "Let's go," he said cheerily, as if this were a pleasant afternoon outing. "You'll feel so much better once you see it." Chloe was waiting by the door with a small suitcase. My suitcase. It wasn't packed by me. It had been filled by Chloe quickly and efficiently during the hour I had spent in my room trying to make sense of what was happening. I recognized the old travel bag I used for quick grocery runs, now bulging with hastily chosen clothes, a few toiletries, and my pill organizer. "We just packed some basics," Chloe said quickly, seeing the way my eyes lingered on the bag. "For convenience. No pressure. No pressure yet. Here I was being rushed out of the house my husband and I had built with our bare hands. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, but I swallowed both. I stood straight, picked up the suitcase, and walked out the door without another word." The car ride was quiet for the first few miles. Logan kept his eyes on the road, Chloe occasionally checking something on her phone. The countryside passed by in familiar shades. Fields we had once tended, fences Gregory had mended himself, the roadside stand where we sold apples in the fall. I knew every corner of this land. It was part of me, but it felt like I was being driven through someone else's story, like I no longer belonged here. As we reached the edge of Hazel Ridge, I expected Logan to turn left toward the main highway where Silverwood Retreat was located 2 towns over. Instead, he turned right onto a narrow county road I hadn't taken in years. The asphalt grew rough patches of gravel, kicking up dust fields, giving way to scraggly brush and forgotten barns. I sat up straighter, my grip tightening on the suitcase resting on my lap. "Logan, where are we going?" I asked, keeping my voice even though my heart began to pound. "Shortcut," Logan replied too quickly, not looking at me. Chloe shifted in her seat but said nothing, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. We drove in silence for another 15 minutes deeper into the back roads. I knew these areas. Old farming plots, mostly abandoned places where the nearest gas station was miles away. Logan's jaw was tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, and then, without warning, he slowed the car, pulling onto a gravel shoulder near an overgrown field, nothing but bare trees and dry grass surrounding us. I felt my throat tighten. "What are we doing here?" I asked quietly. Logan shifted into park and unbuckled his seatbelt. His face was cold, business-like, void of any emotion. "This is where you'll get out, Mom," he said simply, like announcing a bus stop. I blinked, confused, refusing to believe what I had just heard. "Excuse me." He sighed as though I were the one being difficult. "Look, the house and the orchard. It's all moving forward. Chloe and I will take care of everything. There's nothing left for you to worry about. You'll be fine here for a while. There's a gas station a few miles down the road. You can call someone from there, arrange whatever you need." I stared at him, my chest hollowing out, my fingers clenching the suitcase. "You're leaving me here." Chloe finally spoke, her voice low, hesitant. "Logan, maybe." But Logan cut her off. "It's simpler this way. You've been resisting every reasonable option. You can't handle the orchard anymore, and the sooner you accept that, the better. This dragging things out only complicates everything." I swallowed hard, willing my tears to stay hidden. "I gave you everything," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Your father gave you everything. This land, this house, we built it all for you." Logan's expression hardened. "And we're making sure it doesn't go to waste. It's time you stopped clinging to the past. The orchard can't support itself forever, and you shouldn't be struggling in that house. This is what's best for everyone." The words hit me harder than any blow. Chloe at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. She glanced down at her lap, fiddling with her wedding ring, but said nothing else. Logan stepped out of the car, opened the passenger door, and placed my suitcase by the roadside. "You have your medication, your essentials. You'll be fine, Mom." I slowly unbuckled my seatbelt, my heart pounding, my fingers trembling. I stepped out of the car, the cool wind hitting my face, the scent of earth and dry grass filling my lungs. Logan got back in, adjusted his sunglasses, and without another word shifted the car into drive. Chloe gave me a brief glance. Whether it was guilt or pity, I didn't care to decipher. And then they drove away. No goodbye, no second glance. Just a trail of dust swirling in the morning light, the distant rumble of tires fading into nothingness. I stood there, clutching the small suitcase, the wind tugging at my coat. The land stretched endlessly around me, barren and forgotten, much like how they now viewed me. For a moment my knees felt weak. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than I had imagined possible. But then, something shifted. I straightened my back. I lifted my chin. The wind cooled the sting in my eyes and my heart began to steady. They thought I had nothing left, that by stripping me of my home they could strip me of my worth. But I was Loraine Carter, and while they drove away with paperwork and empty promises, I still had the one thing they underestimated: myself. I stood tall on that forgotten road and whispered to no one in particular. They left me with nothing, but they forgot I'm still here, and I'm not done yet. I stood alone on that empty roadside longer than I realized. The wind pressed against my back, pushing me forward while my heart tried to catch up with what had just happened. Betrayal had a way of hollowing you out, leaving you standing in places you never thought you'd find yourself. But even in that hollow space, something fierce stirred inside me, a quiet, stubborn flicker. I adjusted the worn strap of my suitcase, took a deep breath, and walked. I didn't walk toward the gas station Logan had so thoughtfully pointed out. I walked in the direction of Hazel Ridge, the only place that still felt like home, even if my house no longer belonged to me. My shoes were not made for gravel roads, and my joints ached with every mile, but I didn't stop. Each step whispered, "You're not finished." 2 hours later, dusty, sore, and more determined than I had felt in years, I reached the familiar wooden storefront of Bell's General Store. The faded paint, the creaking porch steps, the uneven windows. They were a comfort in a world that had shifted too violently in too little time. Inside, the scent of old wood coffee and freshly baked bread wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Behind the counter stood Martin Bell, a man who had seen me through every stage of life. Freshly married, pregnant with Logan, baking pies for town fairs, tending booths at the annual Orchard Festival. His hair was grayer now, shoulders a little more rounded, but his eyes still held the same neighborly kindness. When Martin spotted me, his brow furrowed deeply, concern taking over his features. "Loraine Carter," he said, wiping his hands on a faded cloth. "What on earth? You all right?" "You don't look yourself." I pressed my hand to the counter, my legs threatening to give way. "I just need a moment to rest." I managed my voice raspier than I intended. Sit down," Martin insisted, coming around the counter and guiding me to a worn bench near the window. "You're pale as a ghost." It didn't take long for Martin to get the bare outline of my story. He sat beside me, his face hardening with every word as I explained how Logan and Chloe had driven me out, dumped me on the roadside like I was a loose end to be handled quietly. I didn't get dramatic, didn't embellish. I just told the truth. By the end of it, Martin's jaw was set, fists clenched. "I knew that boy lost his way, but this is something else," he muttered. "What can I do, Loraine?" I blinked back, the sting in my eyes. "Is Clifford Hughes still practicing?" Martin looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Cliff's still around?" "Moved his office to a little place above the bakery when his wife passed. Been helping folks around here with property disputes and inheritance matters. Good man. Honest." A faint, weary smile tugged at my lips. "Then I need to see him." Martin stood without hesitation. "Come on, let me drive you. You're not walking another mile today." In the 15-minute ride through the small town, I let my muscles relax for the first time all morning. I watched the streets I had known since I was a young bride, the small businesses that had survived the neighbors tending their porches. It reminded me that my roots were deeper than the four walls of that house. This town had been my community before Logan ever learned to ride a bicycle. Clifford's office was just as Martin described, a modest space above the old brick bakery with a small plaque by the door. Inside, the place smelled of fresh bread mixed with the faint scent of leather and old books. The moment Clifford Hughes looked up from his desk and saw me, his lined face shifted from polite professionalism to genuine concern. "Loraine, goodness, I didn't expect to see you. Especially not like this." I closed the door gently behind me. "Clifford, I need your help." He stood guiding me to a comfortable chair opposite his desk, offering me a glass of water before I even asked. Clifford wasn't just a lawyer. He was someone Gregory and I trusted with the milestones of our lives, the purchase of the orchard, the birth certificate for Logan, the small inheritance I had received from my grandmother. With a quiet steadiness, I told him everything. The forged will, the pressure to sell, the deceit, the moment on the roadside. Clifford listened without interrupting, his frown deepening his pen, scratching notes on a yellow pad. When I finished, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the neatly folded deed I had retrieved from the hidden compartment in our old safe. The 18 acres with freshwater access purchased under my maiden name long before Logan was even born. Clifford took the papers reverently, his fingers smoothing them out as he read. His eyes widened slightly, a glimmer of something shifting behind his glasses. "Loraine, this changes everything." I leaned forward, my voice steady but cold. I figured as much. He tapped the corner of the deed thoughtfully. "These 18 acres aren't just a small patch of land. They're strategic. They cover the only natural water source that feeds the orchard and the adjoining plots. Any developer who buys the main property can't legally build without access to this land. Without it, their deal collapses." I felt my lips twitch in something that almost resembled a smile. "I need to stop them, Cliff. Not with noise, not with fury. I don't want my life to end in ugly court battles or public shouting matches. I want to protect what Gregory and I built. I want Logan and Chloe to know I was never as powerless as they believed." Clifford nodded a quiet respect settling over his features. "We'll contest the forged will, of course. But in the meantime, we use this deed as leverage. You still legally control the most critical portion of the land. They can't sell. They can't transfer ownership. They can't proceed with anything without your signature. And from what I can tell, you're in no rush to give it." A deep breath filled my lungs, steadying my heart. For the first time since Gregory's passing, I didn't feel like I was drifting. I felt anchored, solid, ready. "I won't make a scene," I said more to myself than anyone else. "But I won't let them steal the life I built. I'll take back what's mine, with quiet dignity." Clifford's lips curved into a slow, approving grin. "Then, let's remind them who they're dealing with." And just like that, the old Loraine, the one who had weathered storms, balanced budgets when crops failed, nurtured a family through thick and thin, stood tall again. They may have left me by the roadside thinking I was defeated, but they had just woken up a woman who had far more strength than they ever gave her credit for. The next morning, Clifford moved faster than I'd ever seen a man of his age move. By 8 o'clock, the courthouse had copies of my deed affidavits filed and a formal injunction request to freeze any transfer of ownership on the orchard property. The ink on the court filings was barely dry when Clifford called me back into his office, his tone firmer, more purposeful. "We've got them in a chokehold now, Loraine," he said. "They cannot legally close any sale on that orchard without addressing the missing piece of the puzzle. You?" I sat in the same soft chair by his office window, my body weary, but my heart steadier. The papers in front of me weren't just legal documents. They were the shield I'd been looking for, the quiet armor I didn't know I still had. By noon, the emergency injunction was granted. The sale was put on immediate hold. Any attempt to transfer ownership of the orchard was legally suspended until further notice. The relief was sharp and cleansing, like a gust of fresh air after months of suffocating fog. But Clifford wasn't done. "I got curious," he told me. "I had a colleague run a background check on the buyer your son's dealing with. Guess who it is?" I raised an eyebrow, bracing myself. "Riverside Development Group." Clifford answered, sliding a file toward me. "They specialize in turning agricultural land into high-density housing developments." "You know what that means, don't you?" I nodded slowly, my chest tightening. "Concrete, shopping malls, townhouses, no orchard, no fields, just pavement." Clifford's jaw tightened. "They offered $6 million with plans to build a private golf course and luxury homes. Your orchard wouldn't just disappear. It would be bulldozed out of existence." A cold chill ran through me, not from fear but from clarity. This wasn't about Logan ensuring my comfort. It was about his personal payday. It was about wiping out Gregory's life's work to fatten his own pockets. Clifford continued. I went further. I pulled the document Logan presented, claiming to be your late husband's revised will. He adjusted his glasses, flipping open the folder. It's bad, Loraine. Sloppy bad. I compared the signature to your husband's legal filings from last year. It doesn't match. Not even close. I leaned forward, my palms pressing into my knees. He forged it. Clifford nodded grimly. It appears so. I'm sending it to a handwriting analyst this afternoon, but I can already tell you, it's fraudulent. Gregory never signed this, and Logan knew exactly what he was doing. A quiet storm settled inside me. Not rage, but something stronger. A deep, steady resolve. I wouldn't be screaming. I wouldn't be slamming doors or making scenes. But I would make sure Logan couldn't take a single plank of wood, a single drop of water from the orchard he had tried to steal. I'm notifying Riverside Development as we speak, Clifford said, standing and walking to his desk. They need to know they've been sold a lie. Without access to your 18 acres, they cannot proceed. No water, no permits. Their entire project collapses. By late afternoon, Clifford returned with an update. The developers are panicking, he said, a rare flicker of satisfaction crossing his usually reserved face. They had no idea you held a separate deed. They were assured by Logan it was all included in the sale. Now their lawyers are scrambling to contain the fallout. I smiled softly, letting the moment settle. Good, I said simply. For years I had been the quiet one. The background figure who baked the pies, ran the numbers, kept the house in order while Gregory handled the orchards. I had been the silent mother, the dutiful wife, the accommodating neighbor. But not anymore. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness, my patience for passivity. Clifford sat back, his hands folded together. What do you want to do next? I thought about it. The orchard didn't need to be sold. It needed to be protected. I didn't need revenge. I needed security. I needed the peace of knowing Gregory's legacy would live on, not be paved over for someone else's profit. Draft a notice to Riverside Development, I said. Tell them they have no rights to this land, no claim to the orchard, no path forward without my signature, and I will never give it. Clifford grinned, standing again. It'll be my pleasure. That evening, after everything was filed, I walked the short distance back to Martin Bell's general store. He was waiting on the porch with a warm mug of cider, his face already lit with curiosity. You done something special today, haven't you, Loraine? He asked, eyes twinkling. I took the cup, letting the warmth seep into my hands. I took back my life, Martin. Quietly but completely. Martin shook his head with a laugh. I always knew you were stronger than folks gave you credit for. I smiled softly, taking a sip. The air smelled like harvest and wood smoke, the comforting sense of the life I had known for so long. But this time it didn't feel like something I was losing. It felt like something I was reclaiming. Logan and Chloe could plot and manipulate. They could forge documents and spin lies. But they didn't understand the foundation of this land. They didn't understand the woman they tried to discard. With every passing hour, the pieces Logan thought he controlled were falling apart. The sale frozen. The will exposed. The developers retreating. And me, I was standing tall, quietly anchoring myself back into the life they thought they could erase. No more silence. No more sacrificing my peace for people who didn't respect it. That orchard stood because of me, because of Gregory, because of decades of labor and love. And now I stood for it. I whispered quietly to myself, standing under the deepening sunset. This orchard is not for sale, not to them, not to anyone who doesn't understand its worth. And for the first time in years, my voice sounded just right. It all happened faster than I expected. Once Clifford filed the injunction, the dominoes began to fall. Riverside Development. The same company Logan had been so eager to impress responded within 24 hours, their tone shifting from interest to outrage. They sent formal notices through their attorneys, citing misrepresentation, potential fraud, and breach of disclosure. I didn't have to do much. My silence spoke loud enough. By the second day, Clifford sat across from me, flipping through pages of legal correspondence, the corners of his mouth twitching in something close to amusement. "Riverside is backing out," he said plainly. "Their legal team discovered the missing deed, the contested will, and now they want no part of this mess." I nodded, letting the information settle deep into my bones. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't argued or begged. I had simply held the truth in my hands and waited. And the truth did what it always does. It unraveled lies from the inside out. News of the failed deal spread quickly through Hazel Ridge. In a small town, it doesn't take long. By the end of the week, local papers had picked up the story. The headlines were polite but sharp. Inheritance dispute freezes, landmark orchard sale, and community farm saved. After fraud investigation? Social media, however, had no interest in politeness. I didn't seek it out, but the whispers found their way back to me. Posts circulated condemning Logan and Chloe's actions. People who had grown up buying apples from Gregory, who remembered the cider stands, the fundraisers, the orchard hayrides. Those people weren't shy about sharing their outrage. Heartless one post read, "How could anyone do this to their own mother?" Another simply said, "Logan Carter, you are an embarrassment to this town." Chloe, who had always thrived on her curated image, her filtered photos, her glossy online presence, faced a reckoning of her own. Her boutique social media pages were flooded with comments, customers pulling their business collaborators cutting ties. The carefully constructed life she flaunted online began to crack under the weight of public scrutiny. And I didn't gloat. I didn't dance in their downfall. I sat on my small balcony above the bakery, sipping my tea, feeling the cool autumn breeze on my face, and allowed myself one quiet truth. They had done this to themselves. Weeks later, the court ruling came in. Clifford stood next to me at the courthouse steps, reading through the judgment. His voice was steady, his words final. The court finds that the will presented by Logan Carter is invalid, containing forged elements, inconsistent with the late Gregory Carter's authenticated documents. Clifford read aloud. The primary estate, including the Carter Orchard property, reverts to the last verified joint ownership arrangement, recognizing Loraine Carter as the legal surviving owner. Furthermore, the 18 acres held solely by Mrs. Carter are exempt from any estate distribution or dispute. I let the words wash over me slowly. The house, the orchard, the land Gregory and I had built, protected, cherished. It remained in my hands. The court had acknowledged what my heart had always known: this wasn't just property. It was our life's work, and it didn't belong to the highest bidder or the most aggressive child. There were no tearful apologies from Logan, no remorseful letters from Chloe. They retreated to the city, their plans in ruins, their reputation fractured. They left quietly, probably hoping the story would fade. But I wasn't concerned with their redemption. I wasn't waiting for them to understand what they had done. I had already made peace with the fact that some people do not change. Some people show you exactly who they are, and the most powerful thing you can do is believe them and walk away. I didn't demand apologies because I didn't need them. I didn't want Logan's guilt or Chloe's excuses. I wanted my freedom back, my dignity, my peace. And for the first time in my life, I realized those things were not gifts to be granted by others. They were mine to reclaim. Standing in front of the orchard that afternoon, I didn't see the shadows of betrayal. I saw the sunlight catching in the apple trees, the steady lines of the fence Gregory and I had built, the distant hills where we had watched sunsets together after long days of work. I saw a life worth protecting. Not because it held monetary value, not because it was a strategic asset, but because it was mine, And no amount of forged papers or manipulative schemes could take that away from me again. I never returned to the big house on Carter Orchard after everything settled. Not because I wasn't welcome there. It was legally mine now, after all. But because something inside me had changed. I didn't want to live surrounded by ghosts, by empty rooms whispering of betrayal, by old walls that had witnessed too much sorrow. I wanted peace, something simpler, quieter, and entirely mine. So I packed a modest suitcase and rented a small apartment above Hazel Ridge Bakery right on Main Street. The apartment wasn't grand. It had one bedroom, creaky floorboards, and a tiny balcony that overlooked the slow bustle of the town I had once known like the back of my hand. But for the first time in years, I felt light. Free from the heavy burden of pretending to be okay for the sake of others. Free from the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. In the mornings, I woke to the scent of fresh bread rising from the bakery, below the warmth of cinnamon rolls drifting up through the floorboards. I would sit by my little kitchen window sipping my simple coffee and watch the town wake up. There were children rushing off to school, neighbors walking their dogs, small shops opening their doors. Life continued around me, steady and comforting. I didn't disappear into the background like Logan and Chloe might have assumed I would. Quite the opposite. I slowly stitched myself back into the fabric of Hazel Ridge, not as the wife of Gregory Carter or the mother of Logan Carter, but as Loraine. Simply Loraine. I volunteered at the community center offering to teach weekly baking classes. It started with just a few women my age eager to learn my secrets for crusty sourdough and buttery apple pies. But word spread quickly, and soon young mothers joined, bringing along their little ones who giggled as they kneaded dough. Teenagers who had never held a rolling pin before showed up eager to learn something outside their phones and screens. My Wednesday afternoons turned into small celebrations of flour-dusted aprons, laughter, and the simple joy of creating something with your hands. When the town library reopened its community garden project, I signed up without hesitation. My body wasn't as strong as it had been in my younger days, but my fingers remembered the soil. I planted rows of tomatoes and cucumbers, herbs like basil and mint, and flowers that reminded me of the wild patches Gregory used to let grow near the back fence. Tending that garden became my quiet therapy. Digging into the earth, nurturing life from the dirt, watching things bloom under my fingertips. And with the modest profits from the orchard, now rented to a young local couple, eager to maintain sustainable farming practices. I did something I had always dreamed of, but never dared to pursue. I established a small trust fund under a quiet name, the Carter Foundation for Sustainable Farming. It wasn't announced with fanfare, no grand ceremonies or photos in the paper. I didn't need recognition. I just wanted to ensure that local farmers, especially young families struggling to hold on to their heritage, had a safety net. The foundation provided small grants to help them repair equipment, expand their crops, or switch to organic methods without drowning in debt. Every morning after tending to my balcony plants, I would take my usual walk. I'd stroll past the familiar streets of Hazel Ridge, greeting faces old and new. I'd stop by the community bulletin board, smile at the flyers announcing bake sales and charity runs, and then I'd make my way toward the outskirts of town, toward Carter Orchard. I never set foot on the land again, not because of bitterness, but because I didn't need to. The young couple renting it, Ben and his wife Amanda, took care of it with respect and love. They mended the fences, tended to the trees, and kept Gregory's beekeeping tradition alive. I would pause at the old wooden gate, listen to the distant hum of life returning to the land, and feel a deep, satisfying peace. I no longer needed to live there to protect it. I no longer needed to physically work the soil to ensure its survival. I had done my part. I had stood my ground, and in doing so I had preserved something far bigger than myself. Sometimes standing at that gate, I would smile quietly and whisper to myself, I don't need to live there, but I'll always protect it. And every evening as the town settled into its gentle rhythm, I'd climb the stairs to my small apartment, pour myself a cup of herbal tea, and sit by the balcony watching the stars blink softly above Hazel Ridge. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by who I had been to others. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just a widow. I was Loraine Carter, resilient, quiet, steady, and free. And that I realized was enough, more than enough. I had always thought life would quiet down after all the dust settled, that once the orchard was safe, once the courts had ruled in my favor, I would fade gently into my peaceful routines, unbothered and untouched. But life rarely follows the script we write in our heads. It started with a message. Logan reached out first through a letter, then through emails. I ignored them. Then came the call. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something told me to answer. Then, his voice on the other end sounded smaller than I remembered, less sure, more frayed around the edges. "Mom, can we talk?" There was no apology in his words, no true acknowledgement of the pain he had caused, only a quiet desperation he couldn't quite mask. He spoke of challenges. Financial strain after the failed land deal, Chloe's online business collapsing, rising debts, pressure from all sides. He didn't ask for forgiveness outright, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent in his tone, the hope that I might fix things again as mothers are so often expected to do. But I had learned my lesson. I listened without interrupting, my heart steady, my resolve unshaken. When he finally paused, waiting for some crack in my voice, for some soft spot to emerge, I responded calmly. "I hope you find your way, Logan, but I'm not here to catch you when you fall anymore." The line went quiet, the silence on his end heavier than I'd ever heard before. I ended the call peacefully, without anger, and placed the phone back on the table, feeling something loosen inside me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't demanded repayment. I had simply closed the chapter. Not long after, something inside me urged me to share my story. Not the drama, not the betrayal, but the truth about what it meant to survive something like this and come out whole. So I approached the Hazel Ridge Library with an idea. They were running a series called Voices from Our Town, inviting locals to share personal journeys of resilience and growth. I told them I had something to say. They welcomed me with open arms, offering me a quiet Saturday afternoon slot. I didn't prepare slides. I didn't write a speech. I simply stood before a modest crowd of women, mothers, widows, grandmothers, and women who had been overlooked for far too long, and told the truth. I spoke of years spent sacrificing of love that gave everything without asking anything in return. I spoke of the slow erosion of identity that happens when you live for everyone else, until one day you wake up and realize you've disappeared from your own life. I told them about Gregory, about the orchard, about Logan and Chloe, not to shame them, but to illuminate a universal experience. I spoke of being discarded not because of weakness, but because of quiet strength mistaken for insignificance. And then I told them about finding my footing again, about the bakery apartment, the morning bread scent, the Wednesday baking classes, the community garden, the trust fund, and the long walks by the orchard gates. I told them about the deep peace I found not in winning, but in reclaiming myself. I watched their eyes shift. Some filled with tears, others with understanding, and many with a hunger I knew too well, the hunger to reclaim their own stories. One woman, Gloria, came up to me afterward, her hands trembling slightly as she held mine. She whispered, "I thought I was the only one. Thank you for reminding me I'm still allowed to live for me." I hugged her gently. We all forget Gloria. The world teaches us to. But we can remember. After that talk, I felt something shift in Hazel Ridge. Women began to approach me at the market, at the bakery, at church. They shared their own quiet battles. Estranged children, years of feeling invisible sacrifices swallowed without thanks. They spoke of forgotten dreams, of talents tucked away to make space for others. And they all asked the same unspoken question: is it too late for me? And every time I answered the same way: it's never too late to live your own life. That week I sat by my window watching the gentle sway of the trees, the soft golden light spilling over Main Street, and decided it was time to write something. Not for anyone else, but for me. So I wrote myself a letter to the woman I had been, the woman I had become, and the woman I was still becoming. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on my bedside table where I could see it every morning, every night. It read, "To Loraine. You survived, but more importantly, you learned to live. You endured years of being overlooked, of being used, of being measured only by your sacrifices. You watched those you loved forget your worth, and for too long you let it make you smaller. But no more. You are not just a survivor. You are a woman who reclaimed herself from the ashes of betrayal. You found your voice when others tried to silence you. You protected your peace when others tried to trade it for profit. You discovered joy in small apartments and fresh bread in tiny gardens and in your own resilience. You are not defined by your titles, mother, widow, wife. You are defined by your kindness, your strength, your quiet dignity. You don't need anyone's permission to live fully. You don't just survive, Loraine. You live." I smiled as I placed the letter down. The world hadn't changed much. There were still children who betrayed their parents, still systems that favored the loud and the ruthless. But inside me, everything had changed. I no longer lived waiting for validation. I no longer existed to be someone else's safety net. I lived for myself. Quietly, proudly, joyfully. And that was the most powerful life I could have ever imagined. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into seasons, and life in Hazel Ridge moved forward at its own gentle pace. I settled into my quiet routines, not because I was hiding from the world, but because I was finally living on my own terms. The noise, the drama, the old wounds, they no longer had a place in my heart. What remained was something steady, something calm. The orchard stood proudly on the horizon, its branches reaching for the sky, untouched by developers, and safe from greedy hands. Every time I walked past the gate, I felt a quiet pride swell within me. Not because I had won some grand battle, but because I had preserved something that mattered. I had honored Gregory's memory, my own years of sacrifice, and the dignity that had once been overlooked. One Saturday morning, I was rearranging the small potted plants on my balcony when there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find a young woman standing there, smiling shyly, her hands nervously fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked. "Yes, dear," I replied, curiosity piquing. "It's me." "Hannah," she said, her smile widening. "I was in your 5th grade class at the community center years ago. You probably don't remember me." I blinked, taking in the grown woman before me, her eyes bright, her posture strong, but I recognized the warmth in her expression. Of course I remembered little Hannah with the curious eyes always asking about recipes and stories of orchard life. She continued her words a little rushed. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've been following everything. The orchard, the foundation, the talks at the library. I wanted you to know. You inspired me. I used to be so afraid of standing up for myself, of living life the way I wanted. Watching you, how you protected your land, your peace, how you started over. It gave me courage. I'm saving up to open my own cafe. I want to live the way you do. Quiet, but strong." My heart warmed in a way I hadn't expected. I invited her in, poured her some tea, and we talked for hours. She told me her dreams, her fears, her quiet determination. And in her voice I recognized a piece of myself, a younger version who had once been swallowed up by responsibilities, who had forgotten she was allowed to have dreams of her own. When Hannah left, I stood by my window watching her disappear down the street, her shoulders back, her steps steady. A deep sense of peace settled over me. I realized then that reclaiming my own life wasn't just about the orchard or the courtroom victories. It was about becoming a quiet example for others who had forgotten their own worth. I didn't need to prove anything to Logan or Chloe or the world. I didn't need revenge dressed in bitterness. I didn't need wealth to declare my value. All I needed was to live honestly, to be good to myself, and to protect the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. I whispered softly to myself, "You don't need anger to take back your dignity. You don't need money to validate your worth. You just need kindness. Kindness toward yourself. That evening, as the sun set over Hazel Ridge and the sky bloomed in soft pastels, I stood quietly on my little balcony and smiled. I thought back to the woman I had been, silent, overlooked, underestimated, and the woman I had become, strong, calm, unshakable. To anyone watching from the outside, I might have seemed like just another elderly widow living a simple life above a bakery. But I knew the truth. I had been abandoned, cast aside, betrayed by those who were supposed to love me most. And yet I stood taller now than I ever had before. I lived free of resentment, free of old expectations, free of the need to justify myself. I lived softly, but I lived fully. And I knew there were others. Women in quiet kitchens, in empty bedrooms, in silent moments, who felt the weight of being forgotten. Women who wondered if their best days were behind them. Women who feared they would never reclaim their voice. So if my story ever reached them, I wanted them to know this. If you've ever been abandoned, if you've ever been cast aside, remember this. Every step forward is a step toward your freedom. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be seen to be valuable. Just keep walking, and you will find yourself again. And as the stars blinked awake in the night sky, I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool evening air, holding on to the soft, quiet truth of who I had always been. Loraine Carter, steady, whole, free. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever felt like you were forgotten after giving your whole life to others? Have you ever stood at a crossroads where you had to choose between quiet surrender and reclaiming your worth? If you've ever been through something similar, or if this story reminded you of someone you care about, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences. Remember, your story matters too. And if you found comfort or strength in this journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. We have many more heartfelt stories to share. Stories about courage, quiet strength, and the hidden power within women like you. Thank you for being here. You are never alone.